Welcome back to RT International. The Israeli army has shot dead a Palestinian boy during a response to a stone-throwing incident in a West Bank village. 15-year-old Mahmoud Badran was initially identified by the IDF as one of a group of stone throwers. Later, though, they admitted that he was an innocent bystander who was shot by mistake. Here's what Mahmoud's family told us about his death.
We were on our way home when the Israelis started shooting at us. That's when Mohammed was killed. When we first looked at him, we thought he had just fainted due to the smell of tear gas. But when we pulled him out of the car, we realized he was dead. He had sustained injuries to his head, neck and leg.
He was very kind. You can ask anyone and they will tell you how good he was. He made Umrah and Hajj when he was just 15. He performed prayers, fasted and died during Ramadan.
Well, the Israeli military said it opened fire to protect other passing vehicles from several Palestinians throwing Molotov cocktails and rocks. But the victim's family thinks that the army shouldn't be making mistakes that result in the death of innocent people.
The Israeli government should try and sell this accidental version of the shooting somewhere else. We've heard the same judgment for other incidents, and we've heard about investigations, but no results were ever reached. If the investigations had been taken seriously and the proper results found, Mahmoud wouldn't have been killed.
Personally, I think that the Israeli army is a well-trained one, and they can't make such mistakes. The soldiers who opened fire on the car saw that it was not a military vehicle and that there were children inside. Israel is a liar, and we have got used to all of its lies.
Well, this is the latest case in a series of similar incidents where the Israeli army has mistakenly shot dead Palestinians. President Obama says the two most recent deadly mass shootings in the U.S., in Orlando and San Bernardino, should be treated as lone wolf attacks and homegrown terrorism. But that's opened up a debate because the killers in both cases pledged allegiance to Islamic State. With more on that, here's RT's Caleb Morpin.
President Obama says he's fighting a war against terrorism, but under his administration, the attacks just keep coming. The two most recent attacks, Orlando and San Bernardino, happened within 6 months of each other, both inspired by the so-called Islamic State. President Obama has referred to these attacks as homegrown and tried to downplay the links to the terrorist group.
So far, we have no evidence that the killers were directed by a terrorist organization overseas or that they were part of a broader conspiracy here at home. No clear evidence that he was directed externally. This was an act of terrorism. This is certainly an example of the kind of homegrown extremism.
But how homegrown can these attacks really be when the shooter swears allegiance to ISIL and calls for an end to U.S. airstrikes in Syria and Iraq, as the shooter in Orlando was revealed to have done less than a week after the tragedy? Is this rise in terror attacks really a domestic U.S. problem that's unrelated to international events? So we're here with former State Department official and diplomat Jim Jatras. So now, can you tell us, is this terrorism really homegrown?
No, not really. It's an imported phenomenon. And of course, the Obama administration and Hillary go through these gyrations. It's workplace violence, it's homophobia, it's guns, and so on and so forth. But when people do these things, and we know these are messed up individuals, but when they do them, they're, in so many words, subjectively inspired by radical Islamic ideology. You know, if you give money and weapons to terrorists, and they have bases of operations around the world, whether we're talking about ISIS or Al-Qaeda, the Al-Nusra Front in Syria, or Boko Haram in Nigeria, Al-Shabaab, and they all have the same ideology. It's the same Wahhabist ideology from Saudi Arabia. And the fact of the matter is, American policy has used jihadist groups like this for decades as a resource in Bosnia, in Kosovo, in Libya, now in Syria. And this threat has been carefully nurtured for decades, and that's why it is a threat to us here at home. And as far as I can see, there's no indication that we're willing to jump off of that treadmill.
More than 170 Democratic lawmakers are currently taking part in a sit-in demonstration in Congress. This is a live video of that protest, which has now entered its 23rd hour. The lawmakers are demanding a vote on gun control following the Orlando shooting, which are considered the worst in recent U.S. history. The move is in response to the Senate's latest rejection of tougher gun laws proposed by the Democratic Party. Presidential hopeful Bernie Sanders joined his fellow Democrats in demanding a vote. Elsewhere around the world, clashes overnight in Bahrain's capital over the Sunni Muslim government's decision to strip a prominent Shia cleric of citizenship. He's accused of stirring up sectarian unrest, but activists say that he's no more than a democracy advocate. Tear gas was fired on protesters who threw Molotov cocktails and burned tires in the streets. It's the third consecutive day of violence in the country. Similar scenes that took place overnight in Berlin, where protesters reportedly set several cars on fire after clashes with police. It's over the eviction of hundreds of activists from a large building which they had been occupying for decades. Police say they had found weapons inside. Up next on our team, Max and Stacey explain why foreigners are rushing to sell off American equities. That's in the Kaiser Report.